kindly ask that we all take our seats so that we can begin with our program for the evening. I'll just give it 2 minutes to allow everyone to take their seats. All right, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the book launch of The Woman Before Us. Before we begin with anything, please allow me to observe all protocol in the room. Former Deputy President and Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Baleka Mbete. Former Chairperson of the IEC, Dr. Brigalia Bam. Ms. Ntombikayise Zulu in the Office of the Premier in Gauteng. The General Manager of the African National Congress, Ms. Phoebe Potgieter. Spokesperson of the African National Congress, Ms. Mahlengi Bengu Motsiri. Mr. Tepo Khobe, the COO of the Gautrain Management Agency. President of the 19th Episcopal District Women's Missionary Society in the AME Church, Mrs. Rishoketsui Mosue. Dr. Barbara Jansen Forster, Senior Executive Manager and Communications and Marketing at the Gautrain Management Agency. Ms. Jane Mufamadi, the CEO of Freedom Park. Dr. Tozama April, Senior Curator at the National Heritage and Cultural Studies Center at the University of Fort Hare. Ms. Shaira Kala, co-founder of the Mbegu platform. Ms. Cindy Swamzamo, President at the Circle of Global Business Women. Rev Charlotte Modao of the AME Church. Mr. Thulasizwe Makhanya, Chairperson of the Charlotte's Mannya-Maxeke Institute. Leadership and team of Exclusive Books Rosebank. Dear friends who have joined us from across all sectors and those who follow us on social media pages, to all the women who also took part in contributing to the book, who reside across the country, we thank you for your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the official book launch of The Woman Before Us, first edition. Their story does not end here. Allow me to open up with a quote in saying that the women who came before us built mountains for us to stand on in order to see a vision further than what they saw and a vision much clearer than what they saw. We're on a live stream on our Charlotte's Maxeke online YouTube page as well as our Facebook page. Please do hashtag should you be posting on social media and do tag us. Happy International Women's Day. Happy International Women's Day to all the women here today. May you continue to do the amazing, phenomenal work that you all do and continue to break glass ceilings for generations that are yet to come. My name is Zuleika Patel. I am an anti-racism activist, a best-selling author, a law student, and the founder of the non-profit company called Dare to Change. The Charlotte's Mannya-Maxeke Institute hopes to play its part in ensuring that women's leadership and impact is never forgotten or unattended to. The stories of women matter, and we shall continue to play our part in historicizing their contribution in the world. Allow me to please welcome on stage our very first speaker, the chairperson of the Institute, Mr. Thulasizwe Makhanya, as well as a descendant of Miss Katie Makhanya, who is the sister to Charlotte's Maxeke. Please give him a warm welcome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Special greetings to leadership in the room and our partners, associates, and friends of the Institute. It's a great honor for me to be here in front of you tonight. It's a special day, as we all know that today is International Women's Day. Linking this program and this project with the day was so important for us. One of our objectives as an institute is to highlight, preserve, celebrate the legacy and history of Mannya-Maxeke and other women. You find that as a first objective for the institute. So the work that we have done through this book, great stories of 42 women. And I would think that it was something that talks to what we stand for, but also talks to the values of the person we're honoring as an institute. We are celebrating and honoring women before us. Women whose lives were disorganized for us, for ours to be organized. Women who sacrificed everything they had just for a better country and a better world. So for us to even start an institute under the name of Mannya-Maxeke, it's something that is so important in creating and also highlighting the important stories of our lives. If we go back to how she started her journey as a young girl born in the Eastern Cape, we had less of information in her early stages of life. But through the power of the pen, we now know where she was born. We now know all her footsteps. So what does it mean? It means that we should always understand that it is important to write and write our stories as Africans, so that the future generation can learn, so that the future generation also can be inspired. So as an institute, through the leadership of my colleague Tosh, we communicated with a number of people that are involved in the writings of stories. So what then we did was to also now identify women who will add value to our mission in preserving and also in celebrating history of our women. So now our vision is to move a step further and have this digitalize this work. Also move a step further and have a documentary around this work. But where we are now, we are here tonight to launch these important great stories of our women. And also we are here tonight to celebrate this important day, which is the International Women's Day. But our celebration is not just celebration, it's adding value to the stories of women, which I think we should make sure moving forward that we preserve and we highlight all the success stories of our women in this country and beyond the borders of this country. This is also what is important about this story is that it's intergenerational. You will start from Mannya-Maxeke to young people like Zuleika, who's the program director. So it means that it accommodates all ages. As an institute, we're doing a number of programs. Just to name the few, We've got youth forums, which encourages young people in schools to start agriculture and small-scale farming. We've got what we call Women of First Awards, which celebrates women of first in different spheres. Like Mannya-Maxeke, she was a woman of first in many spheres. But you'll find that there were so many others after her. So it needs to be highlighted that and also celebrated. We also have what we call we also have a documentary on Mannya-Maxeke. A documentary which also we have a number of women that have contributed in highlighting her story. But also what is important is the institute is that we are also having what we call the Maxeke Club. The Maxeke Club is an extension, an invitation from our side to people that think alike, people think that they can add value to what we do. We will have the forms where you can fill in and be part of our activities. There is a lady by the name of Kim who is at the registration table who will be able then to assist those who want to be part of our journey, be part of our activities. Before I sit down, I want to also highlight that recently, as an institute, we were invited by Her Excellency Ambassador Thokosi de Klasa in Belgium, where we launched a chapter of Charlotte Maxeke Economic and Justice Rights Chapter, which enable economic trade opportunities between SA and Belgium businesswomen. We'll be hosting a delegate of women towards the end of May, whose interest is to create trade opportunities for them and also create a working relationship with their women from our country, South Africa. So for more information, please do not hesitate to communicate with us through the lady at the door. Thank you very much. You're all welcome.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for reminding us that our stories as Africans ought to be told by no one else but us, and reminding us that there are stories of 42 women written by 42 women who are well-accomplished women making strides in their respective fields, telling the stories of African women who came before them, and reminding us that this book is for everyone. It's not for a specific generation, it's intergenerational to educate all of us on the women who came before us. So next up, allow me to welcome up Mr. Tshepo Hobe, who is the COO of the Gautrain Management Agency, who will be giving a message of support to the Institute. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Zulekha. As they say, Madam Deputy President, all protocol observed. I observe all protocol and those who are here and dignitaries that are here. I thought, what am I going to say? The only person who normally at events like this, where we're celebrating women, normally speaks on behalf of the company, is a celebrity today, so I cannot do much, so I'll have to do the work. Let me remind you of something simple. Zulekha, you might not know, but Dr. Don Matera wrote, though now our shadow flickers in the liquid light of liberty, a time will come, my beloved, when we will remember dreaming was never free. And that to love, live, and believe also meant that we had to know, sing, and die. Now, that's the first thought. Let me remind you, dreaming was never free. For you to sit like this, enjoy yourself, celebrate International Women's Day, some people had to live and some people had to die. And therefore, we have to celebrate that moment. But at some point in time, I thought, how does one tell their story? And I was asking myself a few questions, and I said, how does one share their light? You do not share your light by illuminating the valleys. Light is shared by setting the mountain peaks alight, so that those in the valleys can discover their surroundings. The women here today are sharing their stories. They have set the peaks alight so that we can see our surroundings, reminding you dreaming was never free. Hard work had to be toiled upon, and some people had to give up their lives so that we could actually be here and be happy as we are. We as the Gautrain have made a conscious effort to constantly remind ourselves, be it we're the cutting edge of technology in transport and making sure that things work better, and we are a piece of mobility that powers an economy, we are still aware. Even as we sit in our air-conditioned offices, remember dreaming was never free. And remember for you to be able to share your light. This book is about us sharing our light. But this book is about us remembering that dreaming was never free, and therefore the stories should be told in such a way that we all remember. As Don Matera says, and that to love, live, and believe also meant that we had to know, sing, and die. With those few words, I'd like to say, we as the Gautrain, we're making a commitment. A commitment because in the middle of COVID, people started some interesting things. But during that time, on the 31st day of the quarantine, the deep quarantine that we're on, Pope Francis wrote something interesting. He said, rivers do not drink their own water. Trees do not eat their own fruit. The sun does not shine for itself, and flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. We are born to help others, no matter how difficult life could be at times. These stories tell you of women that have spent time to be able to live for others. We celebrate those who spend a lot of time in parliament shouting at some people in overalls, but we're not talking about that today. But that meant that dreaming was never free, my dear. And we have to live for others. With those few words, we will continue to support this initiative for as long as we can. And therefore, as the Gautrain, we are here for the long run. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khobe. To usher us into why we are all here today, allow me to welcome Ms. Mahlengi Bengu Motsiri, the spokesperson of the African National Congress, who will touch on why women's stories matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to one of the contributors to this coffee table publication of the Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke Institute. Good evening, colleagues. Good evening. And I'm very grateful that, very grateful as I look at somebody to my right-hand side, but grateful that the Institute has received so much support for the work that it is doing, especially this particular output. I wanted to paraphrase and also preamble my 2-minute to 4-minute contribution with a quotation from one of the contributors of the book. This is a time, you know, when it's a book club, we don't do speeches. We are simply just doing provocations. So that's one of my provocations. And she's an all-time favorite, Dr. Atambile Masola. I don't know if she's in the platform. I think I'm obsessed with the woman. But one of the things that she says that, and I quote, every time a black woman writes their story, they are resisting marginalization. And she did this when she was reviewing a book, I think it was Comrade Barbara Masegela's memoir, Poli Poli. Every time a black woman writes their story, they are resisting marginalization. They are resisting erasure. And this is a thing that she's written a lot about, actually, the story about women's erasure in history. And I want to just lift up Atambile. I think she's not around, because I would have spotted her. But I'm lifting her story up among the many stories, amazing, all excellent stories in that contribution in the work of the Institute. To lift up this idea about oral history, written works, as a way of defying the erasure of women in history. And I think that she has spoken extensively and written extensively. She's an academic. She's been at UP, at UCT. I'm trying to find out where she is right now, but I follow her work at UCT, yes. And one of the things she says that we need to be doing as women, especially Black African women, is to embark on a phenomenon that is called ukuzilanda. Those who understand Nguni, both isiXhosa and isiZulu nesiNdebele, would understand the phenomenon ukuzilanda. But let us translate it into English. A phenomenon of women fetching themselves. So she speaks about this thing, the phenomenon of ukuzilanda, a sense of connection with identity, who we are, and what we are all about. And she says that it is almost impossible, or near impossible, to advance the cause of freedom and to advance emancipatory politics if we don't have a sense of ukuzilanda. Now I'm looking at Mambalega, and I think about her poetry in exile. I think about Barbara Masegela, her writings. I think about Ruth First. I think we all think about all manner of, dedicators of our freedom. And we think about the ways in which they embarked on the phenomenon of ukuzilanda. And I see the initiative of Charlotte Maxeke Institute as a continuation of the work that was done way back by women in the camps, by women in universities, in libraries, a continuum of that type of work. And I use the word of oral history in particular because it's a much forgotten discipline in terms of how we use oral history to tell our stories. And I want to connect it with the idea of reviving heritage, liberation heritage, but from a perspective of women's viewpoint. And the work that is being done by the Institute contributes greatly to that bigger idea. And hopefully we can take it further. Botutula Sizwe Makanyi, chairperson of the board of the Charlotte Maxeke Institute. And all of this work is being done to advance the work of the Institute that has really been hard at work at casting and shining the spotlight on the contributions of this icon of our liberation, not just our liberation, but the icon of all the women, black, white, and whatsoever in South Africa, about the fact that it is possible for a woman to live in a just, equitable, equal, and democratic society, and that's been represented in the work, and I think that's what Charlotte Maxeke represents, and the fact that it's impossible, it's actually impossible to think of a society where women don't contribute intellectually, because she was the foremost intellectual in this country. And I want to just end it at that and say that the African National Congress is enjoined. I think I'm representing the NC here. I don't know whether I'm here in the capacity of a friend of the Institute or the spokesperson of the African National Congress, but I assume the both. And want to say that we are really wanting to be friends of the Institute. Call us out when we don't do the things we need to be doing to live to those ideals of Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for reminding us that women's stories don't only matter because they need to be celebrated, but the stories of women, we also need to take account for seeing women as intellectuals who came up with ideas to lead our country to where it is and came up with ideas to change the world, which their ideas are still relevant in today's present world. And so whilst we remember the stories of women, we also need to also see their ideas as still relevant to assist us with where we need to go as a society. And with that being said, we're going to kickstart our first session with 4 of our contributors. So let me just take my seat here so we can begin with our first panel. I'm going to start from the far left, where we have Ms. Phoebe Potgieter, the General Manager of the African National Congress. And then right next to her is Dr. Tozama April, Senior Curator at the National Heritage and Cultural Studies Center at the University of Fort Hare, whose thesis is on theorizing women, the intellectual contributions of Charlotte Maxeke to the struggle for liberation in South Africa. And then right next to her is Mrs. Rishoketswi Musue, President of the 19th Episcopal District Women's Missionary Society in the AME Church. And then right next to me is Dr. Barbara Janssen Foster, Senior Executive Manager, Communications and Marketing at the Gautrain Management Agency. Please give them a very warm welcome. Before we begin with our very lovely panelists, I'm going to read an extract from my contribution to the book and touch on why I chose to write about the person I chose. The women who have influenced me have inspired me to play my part and to make a difference that will be felt by future generations so that they will not find themselves having the exact same discussions and reality as I and my peers endured. These women that are on my inspiration list include Dr. Angela Davis, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, Asata Shakur, Audre Lorde, Chief Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, and Charlotte Maxeke. All these women embody fearlessness in their defiance, and they all have used their voices in rooms where they were told they couldn't. So I've chosen to write about Dr. Angela Davis. And the reason why I chose to write about her out of all the women that inspire me is when I met her for the first time when I was 13 in 2016, she said something to me that moved me and touched me and has been one of the things that have been at the heart of my activism, and one of the things that I cannot separate even from the legacy of Charlotte Maxeke, where after we met her on stage, we had a session with her after the Steve Biko Memorial Lecture, where I asked her a question, and I remember asking her, in your own words, could you describe for me who the Black Panthers were? And she said something to me that was very short, but very powerful. In a very gentle and soft-spoken voice, she said to me, the Black Panthers were simply the community defenders and community builders that Black people were always in need of. And that stood out for me because even Mère Charlotte was a community builder in a time where she couldn't build her community because her community was being disrupted by those who arrived on ships. And that stood out for me, that what we need more than anything today are community defenders and community builders in our communities, because what we see today is our society falling apart and our communities breaking down and falling apart. And so we need to be those people who are needed in our communities, the defenders and the builders that we need in our communities. And so I'm going to start with Ms. Phoebe Potgieter on the far left. Could you briefly introduce who you chose to write about and why you chose to write about them? What's the one thing that stood out about their life that made you contribute to this book about them?
Thank you very much, the Deputy President and members of the Institute, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I chose to write about Mum Lillian Ngoyi. And the one thing that came to mind when I've always read a story and heard about her, the 1956 Women's March, as on the National Executive of the ANC, is resilience. She came to Johannesburg at the age of 17. Now, can you imagine, traveling all that way on your own at the age of 17 to train as a nurse? Later went on to work as a seamstress because she couldn't get a job because of her political involvement, and then joined the Garment Workers Union and active in the ANC, in the Women's League, in the Federation of South African Women, and she passed on in 1980. And the resilience, because whenever you hear about her, one of the things that people talk about when they describe her is her oratory. And I think the point that Mahlengi talked about, that we also need to look at women's oral history, because we look at the written words, but we don't also look at what women say and the kind of oratory which Lillian Ngoyi was known for, that whenever she stood up in a meeting, people talk about, this fiery woman, and how she spoke. So her resilience spoke to me. I suppose it's also just today, as it is International Women's Day, about women's stories that's often forgotten. She was a nurse, and it reminded me that a couple of days ago, I think on the 5th of March, one of the 20 nurses from South Africa that went to Tanzania during their independence passed away, Mam Koleka Tuniswa. She passed away in Dar es Salaam, and she was one of 20 nurses from South Africa and they were young nurses who, when the president spoke to O.R. Tambo at the time and say that, we've got independence, we need to set up our health system and train our own nurses, 20 of them volunteered to go to Tanzania and leave their families behind. And she was one of them. And I think that the generation of Mum Lillian Ngoyi, Mum Charlotte, is really a testimony to that resilience that women continue to show. And for me, it was an honor to be part of the project and to write about a very small bit of a story of a woman that I deeply admire. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Could you give us a two to three liner reading of what you wrote about her in the book?
Okay, no doubt women of Ma Lillian's generation disagreed about tactics and approaches, but reading their stories, one gets the sense that there was a large amount of comradeship, friendship, and support among the women leaders and activists. Her friendship through many decades with Helen Joseph, they are buried together in Avalon Cemetery in Soweto, traveling together to attend a Women's International Conference in Switzerland via Swaziland, Uganda, Rome, and Germany, and then on to China and Russia with Dora Tamana, working with Hilda Bernstein and Ray Alexander in the unions. Apart from the lessons from a life of resilience and service, we must emulate her solidarity and her belief in the strength and perseverance of women, that they would and did triumph despite the odds. She was also committed to unity despite differences between people and organizations. We have common enemies today in the form of inequality, poverty, and patriarchy, women, who make up more than half of the population and due to the position they occupied in society have no choice but to be resilient. We must act together and make the change we want to see in our society for the betterment of all.
Thank you very much. Dr. April, could you tell us about why you chose to write about who you wrote about, and give us a short reading of an extract of what you've written about them?
Thank you, Zuleika. Let me join the chair and all my colleagues who have spoken before me to say all protocol observed. My inspiration to write about Mannya-Maxeke, I just try to limit myself to the sphere of the ordinary. For I strongly believe that there's something that is often missed in high academic debates about the ordinary lives of women. So what really inspired me in the book, I talk about women, ordinary women, from my mother, my grandmother, my sisters, abo mama, abo manyano, that I draw inspiration from. That these are women who are just going about their lives. It is that kind of hard work of doing life, if you like. So I draw inspiration from those episodes, but there's one fundamental lesson I learned from my mother. My mom didn't go that much into school, right? She was really not that educated. But what I learned from her, she had this phrase, I use it in the book, ingqondo yemveli, which translates as embracing your inner ability, the inherent ability to think. So there was something there that immediately translated into Maxeke's intellectual capabilities. My lessons from my mother helped me translate Maxeke's intellectual activism. So it was by drawing from that archive, which is at the domain of ordinary, in the sphere of the domestic space at home, but also translating into societal values. And I think as women, as we celebrate our International Women's Day, there's something that calls us to return to the ordinary. To say there's something foundational about us doing life and also embracing the values that make us who we are. With those few words, I thank you and happy Women's Month.
Thank you very much, Dr. April. Me Rishoketswe, please tell us what inspiration you found from the person you chose to write about. How have they inspired you, and why did you choose to write about them?
Thank you very much. Let me greet you all in the joy of knowing Christ as my personal Savior. As a missionary mother in the AME Church and the president of the Women's Missionary Society, which encompasses about 7 provinces and about over 8,500 missionary mothers. As missionaries, we are seen to be planted there to do programs, and if there are no programs, you start a program. The person that I have written about has inspired us in the sense that we have seen that the church is not with the people. And these are the people who, this is ladies and women that have shown us that the church is not about the 4 walls that we see, but the church is about us going out to fold our sleeves and be with the community. And in writing, I have chosen quite a few women, but with the exception of Mama Charlotte, who went to study and came back and plowed and said, this is the church that is about justice, about human, is a church of choice. It was not a church. I have written about a few women from church, including Judge President Monica Leo, but then I chose one of the former presidents who came also as an activist at church, but also a missionary mother, which is Betha Gowa. She was just an ordinary office assistant, did not have much of education, but she really showed that as a woman, there is something that you can do. Plow back. As an activist, she swapped roles. She would be an activist during the day, but over the weekends and throughout her life, she would be a missionary mother who would plow back to the community and show that the church is not only about those people that are set aside in uniform, holier than any other person, but those that can roll up their sleeves and be about community building. These are the women that have shown us that TEAM, which means team, and it's together everybody achieves more. And they went and then collaborated with communities, plowed back to communities, showed them skills, taught them skills that they could be able to feed as women, their families and their children. And Betha Gowa is one of the presidents who have taken over as a young president, who when Charlotte formulated this woman's missionary, which was Woman's Might, years later, she took over and plowed back to the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mary Shoketsu. And I think thinking about what you've just spoken of reminds us how historically institutions of religion have also been a tool and driving force for the revolutionaries who came before us to use those institutions to drive change through them and build communities through them. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Barbara, could you tell us about the women who came before you, whom you draw inspiration from?
Thank you very much, Zuleika. All protocols observe. Baleka, I remember you fondly as speaker, and if I see you, I want to just sit down and shut up. So I'm glad that I've got an opportunity to speak in front of you, because if you said sit down, I almost sat down at home. Whatever I was busy with, I just sat down. Your brief to the women that came before us gave me endless sleeping nights, because there were so many women that came before us that the list, and it is the Mom Charlottes and the Mom Winnies and everyone that all of you celebrated. And for me, as the whitey in the book, it is so patronizing. And they, of course, the Mom Lillians, Helen Joseph, they all inspired me. I had a very difficult upbringing. I had a dad that exposed me to what was wrong in our beautiful country. And I had my second mother, Elsie, that sat when we ate pop and sheba around in her little room. And she looked at me with her cloudy eyes and she said to me, "Ntombazana, I'm worried about you. You're going to have a difficult life." And she was right. I had a difficult life, but a beautiful life as well. And I would not change it for anything in the world. Thanks for that. So I then one morning had a discussion with Mtlago in my office, and I said, "Tlago, who am I going to say came before me?" Because every woman that I had, almost every woman that I had came in touch with, inspired me. This beautiful mosaic of women in South Africa, in Africa, inspired me. A Wangari Maathai that planted trees instead of chopping down trees. That people thought she was crazy. Kenya is my second country. Today I sit in the shade of the trees that Wangari planted. She won a Nobel Prize for it afterwards. A Dame Daphne Sheldrick that instead of killing elephants, brought up the orphan elephants that I visit every time we go to Kenya. Because that's what we as women are. We plant trees instead of chopping them down. We raise orphans instead of pushing them aside. So we decided we're going to write about women, and especially the women of Gautrain. The wonderful women that wore sun hats under their hard hats, that had the French health and security officers pulling out their hair because it's not protocol. I loved them when I drove past them in my car with these beautiful sun hats. You know those raffia ones? And then a sun hat, or a hard hat on top of them. The women that worked in tunnels with these awful uniforms and overalls that they had to wear, with lipstick, bright red lipstick on their lips. I loved them. Silk blouses under their overalls, because they were women and they brought to us Gautrain. And then when our tunnel boring machine arrived, there's a tradition in engineering to name tunnel boring machines after women. I said to my husband one evening around the dining room table, I don't know why they do that. Why do they call a machine that cut through the most difficult rock in the world after women? He looked at me and he said, honey, why would they call them not after women? So guess what we called? I sat there one day with my team and I said, what are we going to call our machine? And we called it Imbokoro. And we celebrated not one woman by calling it after one female, but we called it Imbokoro to celebrate all the women in South Africa. Because Watinda Imbokoro, Watinda Apafazi, Watinda Imbokoro. If you hit a rock, woman, you hit a rock. And I will never forget that day when we hit a bottle of champagne against the nose of Imbokoro. And she started cutting through the rock face of Gauteng. And next to me stood, and I'm sure he won't mind me telling the story, next to me stood, at that stage, Premier Mbazima Shaloa, and he took out a bright white handkerchief, and he wiped down a tear. I stood next to him and I cried as well, because we celebrated every woman in South Africa, those that went before us. So I just want to read the last. As I said, I had quite a strange dad, to say the least. In closing, I was very small when my dad read Bessie Head to me. And I reread her works. He died when I was very small. And I reread her works when I was older. But I can remember the phrase, I'm building a stairway to the stars. I have the authority to take the whole of mankind up there with me. That is why I write. The reason why I remember this, because in my little girl's mind, I visualize it like Jesus going up to heaven, like the pictures in my children's Bible. All these women took me with them on the stairway to heaven. And for this, I will forever be thankful. Because of them, I am. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My question to Dr. April and Ms. Phoebe Potgieter would be, could you tell us what lessons could be learned from your icon in navigating the space we find ourselves in today as a country, particularly the space women in South Africa find themselves in? What could we learn from both your icons?
Well, I think that for me from Mum Lillian's Ngoyi was just a passion about service to her people. In everything that you do, you get that sense of energy and passion and, a sense of that no matter what difficulty she came across, she would find ways around it. And I think that we often today just feel so overwhelmed by the problems that we face. That, it just looks so insurmountable. And I think that one of the things that I always remember about Mum Lillian is that sense of, optimism about that we should make a difference and we can make a difference and we must make a difference. I can't imagine she was the first woman on the NEC of the ANC, like walking into the first meeting. As a woman walking into a room where you are the only one in the room, what kind of courage must it have taken? But despite that, a couple of years later, when they launched the Federation of South African Women, they launched also a women's charter that said, that we're fighting side by side with our menfolk for our liberation, and by the way, we should have equality as women. So I think that some of those lessons, and again that word resilience, of not giving up. There's a wonderful quote from the first president of the Pan-African Parliament, Mum Gertrude Mongela from Uganda. And she always say that when you, Tanzania. Whenever you come across an obstacle, you either go, around it, you go over it, you go under it, you go through it, but don't let that obstacle defeat you. And for me, that's the lesson for today of Mom Lillian Goy for today, that, there are problems, but we need to eat that elephant one bite at a time. We can't give up. We have to building on the foundations of these wonderful women. We cannot give up on building a better country for the current generations, but also for future generations.
Well, thank you, Zuleika, for that question. What I take from Mannya-Maxeke's legacy, I've highlighted the importance of the sphere of the ordinary, but there's also an aspect of Mannya-Maxeke's public intellectual engagements that kind of raised the bar, in political debates. She was a thinker par excellence. There are few moments where I've heard her speak through the archive, of course. The moment for me, 1925, with the discussion of the native bills, the native representation bill that was proposed by the then Prime Minister of the Union of South Africa, Prime Minister Hertzog. Now, what that debate did, it was to cause a fracture within the liberation movement. Historians talk about the split between the modernists and the traditionalists. But what was unique about Mannya-Maxeke was her ability to go beyond both positions. When we think about black modern politics in South Africa, it is characterized by two things: that there is a drive to create a wedge between people, that is of securing certain liberties for a certain class while relegating others to a lower status. But what was unique about Mannya-Maxeke was the ability to go beyond that. To even when she was asked to make a case about the need to have voting rights secured to educated women, although she was of that class, Maxeke went beyond that. She refused to be an exclusive case of being exempted from the rest. Instead, went on to argue very strongly against the systematic deprivation of the majority from the land, the systematic deprivation of voting rights to the illiterate. So we begin to see, when we think of her intellectual activism, here is someone who, with all her qualifications, but was able to be the ordinary person. She was able to go beyond her class interests to even incorporate those of the other people. So when she says, kill the spirit of the South, she was not just paying lip service to that. There are a numerous occasions where she stood by what she believed in. So for me, it is taking those lessons from someone who is able to, stand by what she believed in. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. April. And allow me to just add on a lesson from the icon that I've written about, which I think stands out and is still relevant in today's society. One thing that I think we can all take as a lesson from Dr. Angela Davis is her ability to speak for not just the people who we deem fit to be in our inclusive world, which we're trying to build, but also speak for the people who exist in our forgotten corners of society and exist in the darkest and forgotten corners of our society. Because as we may all know, she spoke quite strongly about reforming the justice system as to how it responds to prisoners and reforming prisons as well. And she spoke on that in order to rethink, how do we build a society where we want to decrease crimes but we're not focusing on reforming the space which holds people who have committed those crimes in it. We're not thinking of how do we create that space and make that an environment for someone to come out of and be part of an inclusive society and be part of building a safe, inclusive community. And that for me is one of the things that stood out, is her ability to speak for the darkest and forgotten corners of our society, and not just only speak for those we deem fit to be part of the world we're trying to create, but for everyone. And it brings me to ask Mary Shoketsui, what do you think is the role of women today in society? And what do you think is the role of young women contributing to that?
Thank you very much. The role of women in this generation, based on the church, based on the generality of it, is to attain and retain authenticity. So we are often diminished by the standards of the world, of the outside world. We succumb so much to wanting to belong, to pressure, and the approval addictions. We suffer a lot from that. And our role should not be of instantaneous gratification, false views and images by other people. As a result, if we succumb to that, we shall never be seeing our role as guides of compasses of realness and authenticity. And our role as the new generation, as the now generation, if I understand you, I count myself as the now generation because I think I still qualify to be remains to be that of leaders for the plight of ourselves and the plight of those that are yet to come and those that are downtrodden. We need to create space that is conducive, that is acceptable, that is accepting and welcoming for our self-determination and the preservation of the legacies and ourselves and the legacies of the future. That is that.
Thank you very much. And it's so unfortunate because I wish we could have this conversation for much longer, but it brings me to my last question to all of you. What does International Women's Day mean to you? And after that, we're going to take a few questions from the audience for our panelists. So if you could all just tell me, starting with Dr. Barbara, what International Women's Day means to you.
It's such a complicated question, and it can be such an easy answer. Mum Charlotte wrote and said, if you raise up, bring someone with you. I'm beginning to despair if I look at some of, especially the younger generation, and I'm now old enough to and it's not criticism, it's an observation, and we can turn it around, especially in the professional world. There's a tendency to push people down. If you raise up in your work, in your professional world, you don't bring people with you, and I'm very concerned about that. It's so wonderfully African. What Mum Charlotte said there, if you raise up, bring someone with you. It's so Ubuntu, and Ubuntu has been so prostituted, not only by us, but by the whole world. There's even, is it on one of the software development programs, Alita? What is that? It has a program called Ubuntu. I almost died when I saw that. But why do you have to, because if you bring someone with you, if you raise and you bring someone with you, you stand on that mountain Tsepa spoke about. So please, let's celebrate International Women's Day by bringing someone with us.
Thank you very much. International Women's Day, it's a call for us to awareness as a society, not just as women, but as a society. As a reflective exercise, it's something that leaves much to be desired, you know. And it's a principle of essence that tells us that there are experiences to be lived by all. It's a call to action, a reminder, and a need to be urgent in a pursuit for justice and equity for all. And as women, it tells us that we should not be worried about being invisible in this world, but be worried and concerned about forming forces that are unbreakable so that we can be recognized. And that's what it means to.
Well, for me, the International Women's Day means two things. One, it is taking stock of the achievements of women, because at times we are too hard on women. We tend to, not see what women have achieved. There has been great milestones that the women have secured, not only for themselves, but for society, for the world. It is taking stock of those achievements, but at the same time being cognizant of the challenges that lie ahead. Now, when I think of that, currently the United Nations theme for this year's International Women's Day is that of bridging the digital divide. It talks to the issues that impact society today. Now, if we miss the opportunity to reflect on those challenges as these women, younger women in particular, I think we would have missed a great opportunity to kind of foresee, that going into the future, the world is going digital, and there's no way that we are going to miss out on that.
I think that International Women's Day for me means the power of solidarity. The fact that across the world, women today are reflecting on our common challenges that we face, but at the same time also the achievement that we've made as humanity. Whether, no matter what part of the world, a little bit then over 100 years, very few of us had the vote. We've made advances. The issues around equal work for, or equal pay for equal work, the right to childcare, the list can just go on. And those are common issues that women face anywhere you go in the world. And for me, International Women's Day is about solidarity, about understanding what women in our country, in the Southern African region, in the continent, and the rest of the world are confronting. But at the same time, the power of solidarity, of the fact that we can learn from each other, that we can share our experiences. And by sharing those experiences, we build something much, much stronger than if we just do it in our little corners. Thank you.
What does it mean to you?
Thank you for that, Dr. Barbara. International Women's Day to me is a reminder of we're not where we're supposed to be yet, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't still be putting in the work to reach the future we want to reach. For me, it's a reminder to continue to do the work and strive for the future that we want to achieve. And most importantly, it reminds me that even if one woman in any part of the world is still oppressed, then we're not free yet, and that means we still have a lot of work to do. Thank you. I am now going to open up the floor to everyone. You'll be the first one. I'm going to open up the floor to everyone, and I think Kimberly or Nonhlanhla, if I'm not mistaken, will be having a rotating mic, and I'm going to take the first 3 questions, allow for the panelists to answer, and should there be more, take the next 3, and then they'll answer. Any hands? You're number 1, you're number 2, and you'll be number 3.
All right, thank you so much. The long greetings, I'm just going to say all protocol observed. My name is Kifilo Lekabe, and for the past couple of weeks, I've been going through a lot emotionally and mentally. The one question that I was asking myself is that I'm helping everybody else, trying to help everybody else, but who's helping me? You know, and from what you said in that day earlier on when you were speaking, and now my mindset has completely shifted, that my life is not mine. Too many times we think that we operate from a perspective of passion, but we operate from purpose. And purpose is not something that you can easily run away from, right? So I gate crashed the event, I didn't know it was happening, and it's because of, it's the universe just saying, this is what you were called to do, right? My question is, when I hear a lot of the times about women or men that have really fought in the struggles and have tried to change the country and improve the lives of others, the struggle, yada, yada, you know, I question myself and I say, I didn't grow up struggling. Yes, obviously there were issues here and there with family, the typical stuff. I look at my story and I'm saying, who am I to try and go out there and help others when I'm operating from a place of privilege? How do I know that, how can I say to somebody else, you should go study, you should follow this path, you should, whereas it was easy for me because I went to affluent schools, but they didn't. So what I know, they don't know. What comes easy and natural to me doesn't necessarily come easy and natural to them. So how do I know that the work that I'm doing and not feeling like I don't have a struggle enough to help other people that are struggling? How do I then find my space in all of that? Like when I spoke to you earlier on, you said you're fighting racism. It's probably because you've experienced it firsthand, right? What am I fighting that I have experienced firsthand? How do I discover that about myself so that I don't feel like a fraud when I'm talking to other people about how they can improve their lives? I'm fighting this cause just because I didn't go through it. How do I help women who've been abused if I myself haven't been abused? How do I help rape victims if I myself haven't been raped? So how do I then just allow myself to get into such spaces without feeling like I'm not qualified enough to be fighting or growing others in that particular space?
Could we just know who the question is directed to, or is it for all the panelists? Okay, who would like to take it? You can take it, Dr. April.
Thank you for that very kind of, you know, I can immediately hear it coming from the heart. I'm going to answer this. You know, last night I was watching an interview with Dr. Suleiman of the Gift of the Givers. I'm going to respond to you with the response he gave to exactly the same question. That it is by recognizing that which you did not experience. And, you know, by recognizing that, it would, in a way, bring about a mindset, a shift in your mindset to acknowledge, just by acknowledging that it could be a question of the struggles that you have not endured, but that does not take away the struggles of those who have endured those challenges. So for me, it is more about an attitude towards that which you have no experience of, to acknowledge that. Just by acknowledging, I think we can go a long way in terms of empathizing, you know, just by acknowledging, to say, I may not have full experience of going to bed without hunger, but I respect someone who goes to bed without hunger and still wake up the following day, you know? So for me, it is about that attitude to begin to acknowledge. Yes. Thank you.
Just want to ask you, who are you not? Not to who are you not?
Thank you. Number two.
Greetings to everyone. I am Manira Africana Katongale. I really want to acknowledge the speakers today for a book that is clearly a labor of love and a labor of liberation. My question will be to Dr. April today. You spoke so brilliantly and so purely about brewing the revolution in the ordinary and emulating the revolution in the ordinary. My question for you today is, how do we as Black people exist beyond a response or a resistance to white supremacy, to colonialism and to sexism? How do our lives become ordinary and greater than, these very oppressive structures of Blackness and womanness? Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that question. It's a very good question. As I indicated earlier on, for me, it is about nurturing those spaces. For example, when I cited the domestic space of the home as the archive, for me, the existence, it is still structured by the dominant narrative, dominant kind of interests. But within that, there are spaces where people exact themselves, in the sense of embracing that which, matters to you. For me, it has always been, when I talk about the idea of ukusebenzisa ingqondo yemveli, it is exacting yourself, acknowledging that which you have. The inner ability to think, that, the ability to think is endowed to all human, living human organisms, So it is not a question, human beings, it is not a question of, allowing ourselves to be written out of life. It is claiming that which those dominant discourses would have erased. It is by, as the speaker has said, fetching ourselves, quoting Atambile, being able to claim that which society would have. For example, when I think of Mannya-Maxeke, I can't imagine how one would have been able to get to Maxeke's intellectual capabilities without that basic lesson, to embrace the ability to think that is endowed to women, that women have the ability. For when we talk about intellectuals in the intellectual debates, we always talk about the great kind of theorists of the time, 20th century, Abo Gramsci and them. And then when he talks about intellectuals, he writes women out of that concept. So it is about getting to those spaces, nurture those spaces. The domestic space for me really has been a very kind of powerful space to learn from. That has helped me, comprehend the complexity of Mannya-Maxeke's intellectual productions that go beyond just the sphere of the domestic space. She actually revolutionized that space. There's so much that we can talk about. So it is about claiming and retaining those spaces.
Thank you very much. My name is Bingi Numa. I am the coordinator for the ANC Women's League in Greater Johannesburg. Let me greet our panelists and a special greeting to the convener of the ANC Women's League, Umam Balega. Siyabulisa, Mam. Look, it is very profound for us to be here today, celebrating these iconic women that you have written about, because some of us, we owe our being and we owe our ability to stand in platforms and participate in politics, which are still mainly male-dominated. We owe it to the likes of Obama Mshalot, who challenged the status quo when the ANC, was not recognizing the role of women, in the struggle, when it was actually women who were carrying the fort, of the underground struggle in the country and taking it to various platforms, and across the borders of South Africa. Dr. April speaks of Mannya-Maxeke and translates her into the ordinary. And, simplifies a woman who most of us would view as a simple woman, but we still do not understand the depth of the woman that she was. We speak on a day-to-day basis about the struggle against patriarchy. We speak about the struggle against gender-based violence. Government invests a lot in terms of fighting the scourge of gender-based violence, but still, we have not come anywhere near being able to win the war against gender-based violence. Now, where I would like to engage all the panelists is, where are we missing the ordinary in the fight against gender-based violence? How do we, as the women who give birth to the boy child, who all of us can agree that when you've given birth to a boy child, you worry that he is a potential perpetrator, of gender-based violence. When you are in your home, you worry so much about what you are teaching your child, because we know that gender-based violence and patriarchy, it is us as women who entrench it, in the main. We are, the advocates of gender-based violence, because we tell and differentiate our children what a girl must do and what a boy must do. How can we emulate the struggle that these women waged in us to be able to find a lasting solution to end the scourge of gender-based violence? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question, a very important question. We'll start with you, Dr. Barbara, and then go this way.
Can I not work on wildebeest first? I think, in my opinion, and it is from a privileged opinion I have to add, it is a larger community issue. It comes also linked to poverty, to very often the absence of a male figure or very often the presence of abusive male in the house, and then the problems of a female allowing abuse in the family, and before we have solved those community issues, the larger community issues, solving gender-based violence is going to be problematic. And we will all, as women, have to stand together to solve the problems. And Mambaleka, we as government will have to be very much more proactive in solving that. And you and I, and you know that. We have to be, every day, every year on Women's Day, we all as women have to hang our heads in shame, because we as government and as women in government have not done enough. We have every year I feel we failed our mothers, our sisters, and I know we do a lot, and there's still a lot to do, but I sometimes just despair if you look at the statistics. And maybe the very clever people and the women of God next to me, maybe it's time to, sorry sister, but I think it's time to bring the man on that into play.
Thank you very much for that accolade, woman of God. I think we have lost it as women, because one thing that we need to know as women, we need to be a collective. And as a church, I'm not saying the AME church, but as a church, who is the church? You are the church. The church is not the four walls. You are the church as an individual. And we have lost our purpose. We have forgotten about our position. And we've also forgotten that we can be productive. Why am I talking about purpose? We have been called to do something as women. And we have deviated. It's all about position in terms of earthly positions. And we have lost that which we have to do as a collective, as women of God, as the church. And it's either we stand for something as a church or fall for anything and everything. And that's where for far too much we find that as women we succumb to this. I love what you said when you say patriarchy. I believe there's nothing as patriarchy. We are the perpetrators. We are the ones who motivate for patriarchy because we can connive with those that which are pushing patriarchy as women. We talk about fixing each other's crown, and yet mine is not, is skewed. And the moment we can come together as women, we will know, forget about the approval addiction, forget about our identity crisis, and come together as women. That's why I said we need to be worried about not being invisible, but about not forming strong, formidable forces to be recognized. What is our position? We have forgotten about that. We have been placed and set aside. We have been called and set aside as a generation of royal priesthood. And the moment that we have shifted from that, that's where we forgot about our position. And if we can recognize that our various talents as human beings used together bring us together, and we will realize that there is a place for all of us in the table. And once there is a place for all of us in the table, we will be able to fight this collectively as a people. And we know that then there will be navigation, which is action. And then we will arrive at the destination, which is the fighting and the winning of this gender-based violence and abuse. And to achieve it, we also need action, coming together, bringing together the TEAM. Together, everybody achieves more, not as a silo, and we will be able to win those that which we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, my sister, for that very thought-provoking question. I am going to approach this from a perspective of a historian. You know, at times we historians are seen to be, you know, out of touch with reality. We're so locked up in our kind of past conversations and debates. But what your question brings to mind is Charlotte-Maxeke's ability to create enduring institutions. One of the institutions that Charlotte-Maxeke introduced to South Africa is the AME Church. Right? Now, if women have a vision for a better world, for a better society, what stops us from drawing from our collective wisdom to build that which we aspire to? Now, when we think of Charlotte-Maxeke's active engagement in the domain of care, she is someone who introduced a culture of public care at the time when the Union government did not have a concept of public care for communities, deserted communities, right? She, through her own voluntary work, visiting prisons, when she ultimately got appointed as a probation officer after many years of voluntary work visiting the destitute. You know, in South Africa in the 20s, they spoke about the problem of child delinquency, that you had a lot of children that were roaming the streets, but were actually a product of a social maladjustments that were kind of causing those kind of delinquencies, if you like. So for me, it is us putting in the work of drawing from our collective wisdom as abomama in defense of our communities, in the same way as the generation of Charlotte-Maxeke did. And actually, not so long ago, the generation of the 70s and the 80s, we've seen women in defense of communities, you know? So I'm not advocating for mob justice here. All what I'm asking for is for us to begin to reimagine, think the models of the communities we want, so that we can inculcate those values through our collective effort in our individual communities. So I think for me, really, all is not lost for as long as we still see these maladjustments in our society, to begin to say, what is the best model that we can think of as a society to begin to return to the core values that constitute us as communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that one of the strength of the women's and gender movement is the fact that to break down that artificial wall between the private and the public. And what I mean by that, and the relevance to gender-based violence, is the fact that what happened, the fact that women are responsible for social reproduction, is not just the problem of the family, it's a problem of society. That's why we fought for public health care, that's why we fought for childcare, and so forth. In a similar way, what happened in the home, if there's domestic violence in the home, it has broader societal impact, because you have children that grows up in a culture of violence, they go to school, they act out, and you wonder why. So that separation between the breakdown of that between the private and the public is an important contribution of the gender movement. How that relate to gender-based violence? I think that as individual women and men, we have a responsibility to look at our own attitudes and what in our day-to-day dealing with issues of patriarchy contribute towards somebody living in a community and abusing his wife, and eventually, I mean, the terrible case of the ANC MP, and eventually accused of killing his wife, and then afterwards everybody say, oh yeah, but we knew that he was doing this, and nobody spoke out. So it's those kind of individual responsibilities. In addition to that, it's the broader public issues about the empowerment of women. Why do men feel so disempowered? That the only way that you can show your manhood is to abuse your children or your wife. What about it? We need to understand it as a society and try to come to terms with it. And I think that over the last couple of years, we've seen men's groups coming together and talking about these issues. What does masculinity mean today in a situation where we're fighting for equality? Because it's not just women whose consciousness must be raised. Men's consciousness must also be raised about what does it mean to live in a society where you're striving for equality. In the same way, in a non-racial society, both black and white consciousness must be raised about what does it mean to live in a non-racial society. So I think that for me, the issues about gender-based violence require from us to do it in both in the private as well as in the public. I mean, if I tolerate my son being abusive towards his girlfriend and then I pay off the family when something happened, it's on me. And it has a broader ramification in society, because that girl thinks that this is just how things are. So we reproduce intergenerational trauma in that way. So I think that we need to tackle both the public issues about poverty, about violence in our society, because it's not just violence against women and children. In fact, more males die at each other's hands every day. So we've got a serious culture of violence that we need to address. And we are traumatized as a society. And I think that what the speakers before said is that we need to look at how do we envision the kind of society that we want as both men and women. What does a non-sexist society mean? What does a society mean where we all are equal and we all the value of the individual as well as of our children, our families, our communities, your neighbor, what you see as the other. How do we see the value in all of that? And in visiting such a society and then to work and unite around that. Just a last point, the first question was really struck me. What is your sense of purpose? And next year we're going to be 30 years since our democracy. And it's 2 generations that have no experience of struggle like we have, or of apartheid, etc. And it seems to me that one of the things that inspire, at least I can speak for my generation, is that sense of that you want to make a difference. No matter how small the way is, a difference in to be the first person that go to university in your family, and to know that passing is important because there's people at home that made sacrifices. Your mother often didn't give money to your other siblings because she had to pay for you to be at university. So the difference that you make by making sure that you study is to, it's a broader difference that you make in your family and in your community. Often we were the only kids that from our whole school that were able to go to university. So my sense is that for the new generation is to find out what does it mean to make a difference today. And there are lots of challenges, there are lots of opportunities that we face, writing the history of women that went before us, the ordinary as well as the extraordinary. The challenges of literacy that we face in schools. There's just such a host of ways that we can make a difference. And I think that for each of us, it's finding that purpose. And at the end of the day, to make that difference in small or big ways. And eventually, the small add up to become amazing. I think that Mam Charlotte or Lillian Goy or Frini Jinwala or Dr. Brigelia Bam or Mam Baleka didn't think about, that they wanted to be this big people that people talk about and write about. But they made those small differences on a day-to-day basis and just keep on going on. And I think that is what's making a difference about, being empathetic, to even if you haven't gone through an experience, but to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And that is what being human means. The fact that we can empathize with the circumstances or the experience of someone. And I think books and reading is an amazing way of learning about the experiences of other people and building up empathy and eventually making that difference in small and large ways. Sorry.
Thank you very much to our panelists. Please give them another warm applause. Thank you very much to our panelists. Unfortunately, I'm not the unprogressive one, but I've been instructed that we don't have enough time to take more questions because we do need to move into our second session where we have another round of very amazing women who will be our panelists. And I'm going to ask that our first set of panelists please take your seats in the unoccupied chairs in the front and allow us to welcome our second set of panelists. I'm going to allow us all just a minute or two to take our seats and get settled. All right, thank you. Allow me to welcome Honorable Baleka Mbete, the former Deputy President of South Africa, Dr. Brigelia Bam, Chairperson of the IEC of South Africa, educationist and advocate for social justice,
To make it.
Ms. Shaira Kala, co-founder of the Mbegu platform and former Fees Must Fall activist. Dr. Tozama April again, senior curator at the National Heritage and Cultural Studies Center at the University of Forte, whose thesis is on theorizing women, the intellectual contributions of Charlotte Maxeke to the struggle for liberation in South Africa, as well as Miss Jane Mufamadi, the CEO of Freedom Park. Could Miss Jane Mufamadi please join us up on stage? Thank you very much. We're going to jump straight into it. And I'm going to actually start my first question to Mambale Gambete. Please tell us about why you chose to write about the woman who you wrote about, and what exactly about her inspired you to want to tell her story, and what part of her life could you pick out and say is something we all need to know about her and should know?
You know that I chose 10 women. So I went crazy, and in fact I could hardly stop myself. There were many more women coming, to my mind, but I had to stop. But for tonight, do you mind allowing me to choose just 2?
No, I don't. You can choose 2.
Because I want to highlight one feature in their characters. Their wonderful skill of motherhood. And I know it is a most thankless task in life, in my view. Most essential, most noble, very necessary during the struggle, especially as young people were leaving South Africa, coming into countries they'd never been, situations they never thought they would be in, and they would find people who were ready to play the most beautiful role of mothering them. So it is for that reason that I chose Mannya-Maxeke, a woman who's not known, was not known for leadership. She was not a leader, but she was a beautiful soul. And when the ANC women's section outside South Africa had to start a child care center, that it was named by that generation of leaders whom we found, who became our mothers, Charlotte Maxeke Child Care Center, because they had grown up in the hands of Charlotte Maxeke. They then decided Mannya-Maxeke should head the Charlotte Maxeke Child Care Center. So I choose Mannya-Maxeke. Young girls of your size, when they came back from the camps or from the schools pregnant, Mannya-Maxeke ran the child care center, mothered them in order for them to mother their babies. But they would go to the bars in Morogoro, drink. Mannya-Maxeke would go into the bar and take that child and say, this is an ANC child, is not going to be sitting in a place like this, and take that baby away. So for that, I honor Mannya-Maxeke.
And I believe it's women like Mannya-Maxeke who go unknown but play the role of building communities and played quite a very important task, which was needed in a time when most of our heads of households were going into exile, when we're taking on the struggle to fight for the country and could not be there for children in the community because they had to avail themselves for the struggle. And I think that it's so important that you've chosen a woman who availed herself for not just only her children, but said that all children in the community belong to the community as a whole and should be mothered by everyone. And it goes back to the saying of it takes a village. Dr. Bam, I'm going to now ask you why you chose to write about the woman who you wrote about. And if you could please give us a short reading of one of the things you wrote about her.
I'd like to make a confession first, before I do that. And the confession is I had even forgotten whom I had written about, for the simple reason that I'm a believer in intergenerational work, intergenerational dialogue, but there is a limit. I mean, you have to choose generations, and then I was thinking, oh my God, I'm looking around this room. I said, I don't even have anyone closer to my generation. So I'm feeling very intimidated. And I'm feeling exhausted a little bit because I had an exciting day, and that's why I'm late. And I want to share that with you before I answer the difficult question. I had gone to a graduation ceremony of my umzukulwana, not umzukulwana, I can't even think in English, my great-granddaughter. Isizukulwana Sam, yeah. And then I'm so proud of her because I would like, to associate with intellectuals. And she had got distinction in the master's degree. And then, so now I'm just trying to see, because these days you have to pop out money and pop out money for your grandchildren. They think that umakhulu is where you get money. So now I wish I could pop out money so she could do PhD. That's on a lighter note. I wanted to ask a question in our last session. And I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to do so because I was absent when the presentations were made. And I wanted to ask a genuine question, and I realized in the room there might be many of you who don't have my experience. There was a time when we didn't in this country, for the sake of most of you, when we didn't have a government that was going to do things for us. And I thought maybe that's what I must share first with people. So I don't have an experience, really, that you have, where a government is supposed to stop men beating their wives. Yes, I'm telling the truth, absolutely. Where a government has got to introduce new morality on issues, on any issue you can think about. Where a government has to deal with our great-grandchildren, in my case, who are very rude to teachers. The teachers, some of you are not probably familiar because you are mothers of those kids. It's a shortage. And so I am not able to understand everything the fullest, because I don't come from this generation where the government is supposed to stop everything and everything and everything. I come from a generation, and that's what I wrote about, where communities had to survive. I come from a generation, this happened both in the rural areas as well as in the so-called townships, which now don't exist. And many people felt at that time, especially the church. The church in this country had a tradition, which it has had for a long time. One of the strongest women's movements were coming from this apartheid South Africa. And the strongest women's movement were black women and white women doing amazing work, community work. And so that's why I wrote about her, because she was at that time, to many of us, a model. She was living in a village in Umbumbulu in Natal. And when I had to go and work in Natal, working for an organization called Young Women Christian Association, this organization and the churches at the time used to employ full-time social workers. They had that responsibility. And most of us didn't get the funding. Most of these agencies didn't get government funding because we didn't have the kind of welfare department we have today. Our salaries were coming from these organizations, movements themselves within the country, and in the later years, a lot of this money was coming from other non-governmental organizations from overseas. I worked in the later years for an organization called the South African Council of Churches. And when I traveled around the country, many churches in this country, all over the churches, had what were called community projects. And one of my responsibilities I had to do was to find money, not from government. That's why I want to emphasize this. It didn't come from government. We're not entitled to tax money on any kind. It was coming from other communities, people who were wealthy and others were not so wealthy, and then a lot of money also coming from overseas. And so we were able, as an example, when I returned from where I was for many years, that there were over 750 staff members employed full-time. And so all the work that was related to my experience was work done by a lot of people also who were middle class. The people who didn't know what was happening in our lives in the apartheid world. Most of white people in South Africa didn't really know what was going on to black people. But they knew there was something wrong with this racism. They knew there was something wrong with apartheid. And so out of that, without them experiencing that, there were people who were committed to give money and to support a lot of this community work. And what I found disappointing, that every time I thought of Miss Makhanya, as we called her at the time, I said, I wonder what would happen to her if she saw the world of today when we are free. And I said, I wonder what would she think of us, the middle-class black woman. Because the gap between the people in this room and the majority of South African women is so big. The poorest people, unfortunately for us in this room, whether we have experienced that or not, are women in South Africa. The statistics are showing us that there are more women who are poor in South Africa than they were prior to 1994. And there are many of us, including myself, oh, I live in a suburb now. Yes, I live in a suburb, and I'm serious about it, and I'm not being cynical. And when I was working the later years with the Electoral Commission, I'm talking about myself. I was shocked when I go out to other areas where we have to make arrangements for people to vote. And you see poverty on the line, you are even embarrassed. One time, you know, this big company, Mercedes-Benz, they gave me a car. Look, I was important, you know. And I told the staff I would never, ever get into that car. I'm too embarrassed to go to a poor area, and I'm getting out of this nice thing. God, I ain't there. I wish I went peel. I wish they'd given the car to me. They didn't. And be seen by people I'm trying to convince. Sure. Their state, there are no roads. And there is no plan for anything that is called supper. You walk into that room, you find it was a plastic bags. This is the real South Africa. And what has happened now, unfortunately, through a fault of your own and the fault of our children, they don't know that, they have not seen it. Because many of our kids never get a chance to go as Lalini, where some of us were in a rural area. They never ever get an opportunity even to see some of the townships. And so I am simply saying that the context of our debates related to feminism of today, the terminology that we are using, the patriarchy, I'm not sure, nobody equally patriarchy of the old. Whether there's brand new patriarchy, I'm confused because that's not my area of competence. But I do know there is an increase of young mothers who are bringing up a lot of boys. You might not be aware of that. And I think we need to think a little bit. Oh, I know the government is supposed to do everything. Let's leave that. And then you'll tell us how they do it. And I listen to the language that these young mothers, who are feminists, by the way, whatever feminism means. I mean, people who are sensitive about these questions. The language, they are talking to this little boy. There's another one last week, my own niece, I scolded her. Puti, in Xhosa, you only use that for somebody older male. Older male, you refer to as Puti as a sign of respect. Puti, calling, this little thing, you call him Puti, what are you doing to this child? And then now you must learn. You must now be a man. And I'm listening to my own niece, who is a big feminist, and so there is something somewhere that we need to think about. And I'm not saying there isn't a problem. I'm not saying the government, but I'm beginning to say, what is happening at home? I know that everything is done in our homes. I don't want to. What is going on at that home that have made these kids so angry? They are so angry. There's something, this anger, you feel the way they look at you, Diaboika. When they say to you, go, I feel like, oh my God. No, I'm telling the truth. And I'm not exaggerating. And I'm genuinely afraid. Because I sense this anger. And then you say, if they catch me, and when you're old, you don't drive properly, you never park properly. Sorry, old people don't know how to park. Sorry, my child, because I'm scared of them. So. And then there's something wrong with the society. That someone of my age could be so scared of kids who are my great-grandchildren. There's something terribly wrong somewhere. And because of that, I have to spend the other part of my life away from where most South Africans are, the townships, the informal settlements. And always live our lives in safe places, in our comfort. So I think the problem of womanhood of today is probably presenting new challenges. And I keep saying, I'm wondering whether in fact, somewhere in the thinking of, we shouldn't put justice around it. I don't know how you do that. When you deal with these things, people who can think, is that when we talk about all the other problems of racism, of class, of poverty, or all these things, shouldn't we rethink about the new human being of the new society? I don't know how we are going to deal with it because I won't be there. And I just think that the challenge is, yes, I think you mustn't stop talking about women, about women's rights, about patriarchy, about, all the, the bad things that men do, including them, stealing. When women make a big statement somewhere, I was saying the same point. He has stolen that point from a woman. Don't worry about those little things, because, yeah. And whether, in fact, the new woman of today, now whatever I mean by the new woman of today, is not a great threat to the male. You know, mhlambi bayanoyika abantwana bam. No, and I'm serious about it. I get a feeling at times, because I'm no more in this world, that we have over-sensitized, is that the word in English? The awareness on womanhood is stronger on women than the sense that a male is subjected to. But I don't know, because I am too far. You know, I'm talking in terms of generation, in terms of my own contact on a day-to-day basis. But I do want to express an opinion. I am disappointed, yes, that the women who are great people like all of us, the women who are in the room, the younger ones, the daughters and granddaughters, don't have the visibility of working with poor people. Yes. And I'm using the word visibility because it could be that there are things that people are doing. And they don't have the visibility. I was employed full-time by a women's organization. There were a number of us who were employed by women's organizations, were a group of social workers, not employed by government. And these were people who were putting money to make sure. And you go, and I did this systematically when I worked with elections, because I went everywhere in this country. I went to every other village in this country. You can go to township and so on. And there's no, where are the women? Where are women? Why isn't there something in nursery school? The pride to say that is our nursery school, or we are doing this as women. Maybe I am talking of visibility. And so the woman whom I wrote about is the woman who was visible at that time to us, who became our model at that time. And she was a rural person, and she was a community-oriented person. She was very middle class. She had also had an opportunity to study in America. And she was the person at that time who was our model of what we should be doing in our communities, doing for young people and doing for women. So that had to be your first orientation. If you come that, who are the women in this village? What are they doing? Where do they live? So it was very basic and simple. But you found them, they were there. The ones, the poor ones, the ones who are not so poor. Some are in trouble, somewhere in a prison, somewhere. So that was, I'm sorry I didn't remember many things about her. She used to put on lipstick all the time, and I learned that from her, that the appearance was important. Miss Makanyaka, like the way I've combed my hair. No, I'm wearing something, I forgot. And then she would always wear a lipstick. And then I learned from her that the image of who you are is important. And you must always look as a woman that you are in control, even if you are not. I learned from you. You don't put your voice. Don't speak softly. Don't speak softly, because they think that they are not going to hear what you are saying if you're speaking as a woman. So I learned a lot of her. Speak sharp. Then nolele opozo bonba lo mama is saying things. So there were little techniques like that. There were really techniques that were important, but at the same time, you are able to remain humble. So the combination of humility as a value system, the combination of sharing is also part of that. And so that was the kind of person she was. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bam. Shira, could you tell us why you chose the icon you've written about and what exactly stands out to you about her life?
Thank you so much, Zuleka. And I think I've fulfilled half of my duty here tonight, which is to hold the mic for Vigaria. Even if I don't say anything, I think I still, I was here. So actually the woman that I chose to write about, and this was such a long time ago as well, I had to remind myself of what I had written and go back to the book, which has been beautifully put together. Thank you to the Institute for the hard work on that. Her name is Mannya-Maxeke, and she is a revolutionary mother that comes from my faith and my community, and was actually very involved in the anti-apartheid struggle as well. So she, for me, embodied what it meant to live in faith through solidarity. And to me, my faith as a Muslim woman, a black Muslim woman in South Africa, has always been central to my activism. So why I chose her particularly was because I could identify with the historical struggles. I could learn from the fact that it takes a lot to stand up to your enemies, and at that point, the enemy was, in no uncertain terms, the colonial and apartheid regime. But also she stood up to her own community in terms of the racism within the Indian community, and also the inaccessibility of the mosque space, which should be a public space, but was rendered inaccessible to women. And in some cases today, as we sit here, there are still some mosques in our country and in our continent. I just returned from a trip to East Africa, and I was told that I couldn't pray in the mosque because I was a woman. So I'm constantly reminded about the longevity and the continuity of these struggles. Zuleika, you mentioned that as long as there is oppression in any part of the world, we always know that we have a long way to go, that we have a lot to fight for. And for us, we don't have to look very far. There are so many challenges that we face. In fact, it can sometimes be very inundating. It was difficult for me to come tonight because I've been struggling to sleep thinking about all the challenges we have. So while I have nightmares about those challenges, I also try to balance those nightmares out with the dreams and the imagination of creating spaces that are just, public spaces in our country that we can truly say allow us to think together, allow us to create together. And being a woman working in film now, I see cinema also as very important because it gives images to what we want to create. The power of image is so incredible. And in the artistic and creative space, just like the activist space, you have to collaborate with people to create those images, to create those motion pictures. And so for me, understanding where I come from, the community that I still live in, I'm still in Pretoria, and I grew up in Lodium, so it's very much a part of who I am. But I've traveled the world now. I was fortunate to do my master's abroad. Most people don't have these opportunities in our country and in our continent. So while we are very appreciative of those opportunities, we need to ensure that when we pray and when we commit to action and solidarity, it doesn't just change our lives, but it changes the world. And that's why Mannya-Maxeke has such a huge importance in my life.
Thank you so much, Shaira. Miss Jane Mufamadi, I'm sure it wasn't an easy task for you to select just one woman, given that you're the CEO of a space which historicizes women. So I'm sure it wasn't an easy task, was it?
It was definitely not an easy task.
So who did you pick, and why did you choose to write about them?
I wouldn't say obviously. I chose Mannya-Maxeke. I think for me, I see a lot of similarities and inspiration from her life, who she is, her background, and what she was able to achieve. But what strikes me the most about Charlotte Maxeke is her ability to transcend. She was not boxed in one role. The multiplicity of her personality. And she did a lot of things, but she achieved all of them. She was passionate about education. We call her a woman of first. The first African woman to get a bachelor's degree in science, which in itself she broke barriers. The only woman who was there when the South African National Native Congress was formed, now the African National Congress. The founder of the Bantu Women's League, now the ANC Women's League. She was a theologian as well, very grounded in her religion. She advised kings. She did all these roles. She wrote about the plight of women as well. But if you look at where she comes from rural communities, where probably education at the time that she was born was not so important or attainable, especially for women. We know historically there were communities where women were not necessarily supposed to be educated. But she achieved that. But within what she was able to achieve, she was concerned about everyone else. She was strong about self-development, but also developing others. And I think her life is testimony for that. And of course, I think most of the people who have listened to me speak in many platforms, I always quote her famous words, that this work is not for yourself. Kill that spirit of the self. And do not live above your people, but live amongst them. And if you can rise, bring someone with you. I think this is what we lack. For me, that message is timeless. It's relevant in many spheres. As leaders where we work, within our families, within our communities, there is a little something that we can do to bring about change, to empower somebody. And more often we don't do that. We don't care enough to want to impact on other people's life. So for me, Mom Charlotte Maxeke is my inspiration, my life, and her passion for education. I think some of us, if we did not have inspirational parents, maybe we wouldn't be where we are today. So I see a lot of what she has lived through, a lot of what she has achieved, having inspired me. And of course, I'm in the business of preserving and honoring not just women, but most of the people who made a difference, who made it possible for us to be here today. But she takes the cake. And that is why, and this is not bias, most of the women spoken about, Ma'am Lillian Ngoyi and many others, if you come to Freedom Park, you will see their stories prominently reflected, because these women are the giants. We stand on their shoulders. They gave us the foundation. I was listening also to the questions and the discussions, and I was reminded, because I think for me, I always challenge the current generation, our generation, to say, these women lived at a time when things were not easy. Just communication was not easy. They did not have the cell phones and the social media, but their message was able to transcend through communities. They were able to be heard. They were visible. With all the gadgets that we have, we can't even communicate. We can't mobilize our communities. So the values that they had, we lack today. And I think they may have been there in the past, but what they did, we can learn a lot. We can draw inspiration. and do that in the present and the future. And that is why for me, Mom Charlotte Maxeke, it's that woman that I chose amongst the many others, because as Dr. Bam was talking about Mom Makanya, you would have thought she was talking about Mom Charlotte Maxeke. The similarities, the commonalities of those women before us. I think that is what we need as today's generation to address the challenges that are being raised here today. We are capable, we can do it, only if we put our minds to that and commit to changing the environment, the context, and addressing the challenges. It's within us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mufamadi. And I like the fact that you brought up a very important and still extremely relevant quote said by Mom Charlotte, where she said her famous quote, "If you can rise, bring someone with you." And I believe it's still relevant in today's society that even when someone asked, how do I be active in the space when I've not even suffered any one of the injustices that many others have suffered? You rising and choosing to empower the next person and choosing to even empower the younger generation is revolutionary in its own, because you ensure that it's not just only you that needs to rise, but someone after you should come. And Dr. April, I know I did ask you, but what inspiration should we draw from the woman you chose to write about? And particularly, what inspiration should young women of today's generation draw from the woman you chose to write about?
Thank you, Zuleika. One inspiration I draw from Charlotte Maxeke is her ability to affirm others. You know, she was a strong believer in the capabilities of others. And I think her leadership was based on that idea of being able to see the good in the next person, you know. And when she passed on, the last organization she helped to build was the National Council of African Women. I acknowledge you, May. That is still very much alive even today. You know, it was through that vision and being able to see the capabilities of others. Utembeka Maina Soga talks about Charlotte Maxeke when she assumes the reign as a leader of the National Council of African Women. She says, in Charlotte Maxeke, the council had someone who fought tirelessly in defense of the people. You know, so for me, it is that ability to know that the work is certainly not hers, but that of a collective effort. That is one lesson I draw from her. But also, just in terms of her story, what does the story of Charlotte Maxeke does to the young people? Now, for me, it goes to the heart of what the Fees Must Fall movement was all about. The call to rethink the curriculum. What are the questions that animate academic studies? What are the questions that animate studies of humanity in South Africa? It is through figures like Charlotte Maxeke that the Department of Higher Education can make a claim to rethink that human. You are talking about what is that desirable kind of new human that we want to inculcate. Now, it is through figures like her that we can begin to reorient the curriculum in a manner that begins to acknowledge the values, the teaching, the ideas of figures like her. One probably for me, it was all about stepping back before one could even make a case about Charlotte Maxeke, to ask yourself, why is it that it took society such a long, long time to begin to collectively converge around this figure. I know the women's movement, from the time of exile years, women have been doing their bit. But what was unique in my archival excavation, even in those 70s, in those 80s debates among women had acknowledged that the story of Charlotte Maxeke had not been told fully. And partly because some of the foundational questions that animate academic studies, questions that animate our inquiry into who we are as a people, do not go to figures like her. It is for us now to say, for the young people, here is the image of someone who brings a new sense of self, that as a young woman, you can be a leader of society, you can be a thought leader, you can be everything that Charlotte Maxeke and more. So for me, really, it speaks to those two influences, that of her leadership qualities, but what her story does for the present generation, that it reorients our understanding of the questions that animate studies in the field of humanities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mambalega, could you tell us what lessons are still relevant in today's world that we could learn from your chosen icon?
I go back to what Tozama raised earlier, the ordinary. The ordinary and the authenticity of who you are. Your value system. And Barbara said Ubuntu has been really messed around, but you know what? We should reclaim it because it is necessary. Ubuntu is what we need. And I know I've survived in political situations by just adopting simple principles zobuntu. And some of those are things like Mdomdala, you respect. You respect age because age comes with experience, exposure, lessons learned, something that I, a younger person, can learn from. And I always tell the story of arriving at an enclave in a place we lived in Cape Town, where there were three of us. There was a minister of the ANC in charge of intelligence who immediately briefed me that the third person in this enclave is not from our political background. So, okay, I noted that. Then life went on. And then, of course, he briefed me very firmly that I am not to allow anyone from my household to venture into the space of that other household. Then life rolls out, it happens. And my child ends up in that house of this place one never supposed to go to. And in fact, when he gets there, he finds the chocolate on the table and he takes it and he walks out. So there's an issue that arises. What saved me in that setup? It was just a complicated, tense situation because here's a person I'm not supposed to relate to normally like a human being. What saved me was for me to always acknowledge the age of this person. And that I was brought up, taught to respect that age, because that age goes with a lot. It's not just a number. I hear this thing about age is just a number. No, it's not. It's not just a number. It's experience. It's depth of insight because you've walked this road that I have not walked. And therefore, I must respect that the old people, when they taught us these values, were not crazy. And they hadn't gone to universities. But they brought us up on that menu. And I simply decided I'm going to respect the old man because he's an old man. He's my elder. It doesn't matter which church he goes to. It doesn't matter which political party he comes from. He is my elder. And I must respect that because my parents taught me that. That saved me through that situation. And to this day, we're good friends with that elder. And it's an elder in his 90s that I've always had a good relationship with, regardless of party political affiliation. And I think as younger generations, let us learn to respect age. Because this thing of elders must go, I don't know where that thing comes from. This tone of dealing with age like is rubbish. Just the fact that you walk into a room and you find it full of a generation of white heads, personally, is something you must celebrate. You must celebrate those people because they've seen a lot of trouble. And if they are black, you must be sure their lives were very difficult. So younger people respect age, it helps. It's not every elder that wants to push themselves or to force themselves on every situation. It's not necessary for elders to be disrespected. Criticize what needs to be criticized, but respect age because it goes with experience and a lot of lessons that could add value to your life as a younger generation person. It has helped a lot of people through life.
Thank you very much for those wise words, Mambalega. And I'm going to take this opportunity to get an intergenerational opinion with my next question. And I'm going to start with Shaira and then come to Dr. Bam and ask, what do you believe is the role of women in this generation, and particularly young women? What is our role, Shaira?
Yes, there's obviously many roles that we have to play. Part of our role is to bridge the past and the future. And the only way we can do that is by also being frank about the situation we find ourselves in. The fact that we stand on the shoulders of giants, but also history is complex, and many of the people we look up to have fallen from grace. You know, many of our struggle heroes have been implicated in some of the worst forms of abuse of power, sort of viewing themselves as demagogues who should not be accountable to the people. And there's a cautionary tale there for us as this generation, that no matter how much we may contribute, no matter how far we may go, we have to always understand where we've come from and who we really are accountable to. You know, Mamberkelia, you mentioned the government is not always going to solve all the problems, right? But at the same time, there is a responsibility that the state has to its people. And when we talk about government money, whose money is that at the end of the day? Where does it come from? So I think our generation is got a difficult task ahead of us, because we have to focus on accountability, but we also have to focus on the fact that it may not come in the forms that we hope. And that still leaves us with the challenges of building a future on the ruins of the present. So for us, we have to really come together in ways that may be difficult, that may be challenging for us, but we've seen that people come together in the past. We've seen people come together amongst each other now, even if we think about the student movements and what we were able to achieve and what still needs to be achieved. I mean, there are protests at WITS right now, there are protests at UCT and all of the other historically black universities that often don't get the same airtime in the media. So these challenges around accessibility to higher education institutions are just the tip of the iceberg, because we're dealing with a case of young people who can barely read critically with understanding. So this book, how are we going to make it accessible to them? How are we going to create spaces where we can really get to the heart of the issues that we face on a systemic level? Because we have this myth that we believe that if you work hard, you will succeed. But the hardest working people in this country are still the ones that are suffering. So you have to think about different ways of living. Basic incomes, basic services. The role of the state is very important, but so is the role of our communities. So we're not disagreeing, but we can't let them off the hook.
Dr. Bam, with the opinion of the young, what is your opinion in terms of what role do young women have today in this generation?
I think it is to learn in a new way how to love other people. And when I'm using that term, I'm not using it in a romantic sense. I'm using that term really, truly, absolutely truly. One of the things, and you have to understand, I speak because I belong to that generation, is to find people not belonging to anything. Well, I don't say people must go to church because some people don't like church. I don't mean that people must all play sport, because not everybody plays sport. I don't expect everybody to be involved in a youth group somewhere and be part of that youth group and assist it. But people, beside living for one's self, I, me, myself, I, me. And what has happened now, in some ways, I find it fascinating that people are so keen to relate to other people, to talk to them through the phones. Well, those of us who don't belong to my generation, everybody is sitting on their phone. Everybody's sitting on the phone. For 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, they're on the phone and they're laughing and they're enjoying. No, I'm saying this is the new society, is that people are yearning to interact with other people. That's why the social media, I think, is people are yearning for attention, they are yearning for love, they are yearning for fun, they are yearning for more money, all human beings in different degrees. And I'm convinced that the success of this new terminology is the opening of this desire for human beings. I'm amazed because by the time I get up, because we've been working before you were born, so at least you can do one thing for yourself, just have 2 extra hours than you people. I find that my phone is already full. Go 5 o'clock, they are already thinking. And I try to say there must be something that human beings are looking for, surely. And when people sit on that phone, I watch it, I watch them in the room, people that can talk, and a little bit of time. Which means human beings are searching in a different way to interact with other human beings. I'm convinced about that. The story wouldn't be so successful of the way everybody wants to know who says what. It's nice also for gossiping, which people like. There are normal things that people like. And I'm saying that maybe you should go back, human beings, that you don't only relate to people through your phones. Maybe there should be a new culture of people, your culture of the new world, that you belong to interesting groups. If you're old-fashioned like us, then you belong to reading groups. We used to read more books than you did. We didn't have the kind of money you have, so we had to exchange all these books. And then we had to and then we would have small groups discussing a book. Just do something with other people who are younger. Honestly, truly, there is no way in which we expect the government to deal. I was in one meeting and I was shocked. Somebody said, why is the government not doing things about the high rate of teenage mothers, that high? And I'm serious, this was a genuine criticism. We have a very high rate of young mothers. That's the word I prefer to use. And who is there for them? And so there must be a new way in which we want to relate in society and go back to be part of something. And be doing something for other people. And I'm not criticizing. It's a new system. Instead of only talking to them on the phone for 1 hour, for 2 hours, and so on, then we relate to them. And I'm serious about this. Find them. There are human beings everywhere who would like to be part of your fellowship for a study, who would like to go out to you, who would like a weekend out. As a group of people, you take young people out for a workshop. These were very helpful outings. In the olden days, there was something that were called youth camps, where young people would go and everybody looked forward to going out, meeting other young people, and you have a program. Just something in order that you keep the human contact. Yes. What I'm really yearning for is a new society that will also relate and empower the humanness in it of other people, whether they are poor or whether they are not poor, but other members. And also share something with them. You know, Nyavimba, you don't, if you say, let's make a collection. My mother used to say, and I'm repeating this to all of you in the room, if you have not won something for 2 years, you don't need it. The husband, you have got too many clothes. No, and it's serious. That accumulation of things and clothes and shoes. Let's find a new way of sharing. It's simple, it's simplified. You just take them out. Once you have given them away, ourselves kumbu, you don't miss them. You know, you always say, oh, I might wear this one day. And I'm serious about this. This is not, it's not something I'm joking about. We must just share things to learn, to share more with other people. We don't need to spend money to do that. And you are part of this fellowship of where you put your clothes together, and the old clothes are clean, and they can be used by other people, and they appreciate that. People don't have to do big things. Let's go out to communities and find other human beings. There's a lot of loneliness out there. And there's a lot of poverty out there. And there's a lot of stress out there. And you find that what people really need is just to have somebody to talk to. And then once it's out of your chest. It's out of, you know, when they teach you counseling, which is counseling, talking about, when you counsel people, they teach you that, don't worry, they're not looking for advice. When people come for counseling, they will find the answer. They just want, it's full of trouble. Create yourself to do this to other human beings. Honestly, it helps. Complain. You can even complain about your husband, it's fine. You can even complain about your children, it's fine. You still love them, but you need a space, and then continue to love them after that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bam, for sharing those very important lessons, that it's in the smallest things, and we have to go out there and stop limiting ourselves to our own small corner and go out there and meet people and have human interactions with people and doing small things to better our communities. I hope everyone was listening as I was. And I'm going to close off the panel asking my last two panelists on the far left, Dr. April and Ms. Mufamadi. Ms. Mufamadi, as someone who runs a space where women are historicized, and you, Dr. April, as a historian, would the women before us feel proud of us today, and how do we honor them?
That's a difficult one. I still want to go home. Yes and no. There's a lot of women today who are doing a lot of good work to change their communities, to change the spaces where they are. I think we don't take that lightly, really. But I think in the same vein, we seem to have outsourced our responsibilities. I've been listening to my elders here in the panel. Mom was talking about expecting government to teach men not to rape, or our children. We have that sense of entitlement which negates our responsibility and accountability. Because if in a community there is a rapist or an abuser, why do we protest to government to solve our problem? That is our problem as a community. We need to stand up first and take responsibility and say there will be no abusers in our community. Even if government will come, we need to sustain the solutions. Normally, solutions that works are solutions that comes from within. They are sustainable because government can do policies and frameworks, but the environment and the context, we know it better. We know the spaces where we live. So the solutions are within our hands. I do believe the women before us will be disappointed in us because they stood up, they fought the battles. Some, if you read the life of Mannya-Maxeke, she spoke a lot about the plight of women because these women were oppressed. They suffered multiple oppressions, but they stood up and fought apartheid as well, with the other challenges that they had as women, either in the workspaces, within communities and homes. But they had a sense of purpose and responsibility. So I think the current generation, we seem to lack in that sense of responsibility, accountability, and being the first, like Mom Charlotte was. We turn a blind eye in the community. As long as my family is fine, then I don't care about others. And that is when the problem has a ripple effect. So I think they will be somewhat disappointed, but very proud because still today, there are many women who spend sleepless nights helping others. Some very unrecognized. We don't thank them enough for that. And some, in their attempt to work, we still criticize them. We pull them down. We live in a society, you listen to news, to interviews. I don't know if you have seen the narrative in South Africa. We share negative stories. Yes. Most of the interviews either on TVs, whether it's a minister, a leader, or a community worker, we tend to find what people are not doing. We want to profile the shortcomings. And when we do that, we don't realize that we're demoralizing. We oppressing further the people. No one is perfect. We all have challenges, even women in the spaces. But we tend to find the negative, not profile the good work that many people, many women are doing today. And I think we need to change our mindset. Let's be a little optimistic. Let's be a little appreciative of others. Because sometimes I think we see our failures in others and we don't inspire others to do better. People will try but fail, but say, that was a good attempt. If you do this, I think you will go better, rather than, we knew you will fail. So I think that is the difference between the women who brought others with them as their roles. We are not doing that enough. We have started, we have a good foundation. I think we can build on it. Thanks.
Well, coming to that question, you know, your question, Zuleika, reminded me of the words of the Caribbean Black radical scholar, David Scott. He talks about, you know, he says, it is not in the answers we give, but the questions we ask at times that we either lose, you know, focus. It is not in the answers we give, but the questions we ask. And coming to your question, it is, I doubt the women we write about would, based on the standards they set for themselves, I doubt they would expect us, you know, to kind of, you know, perform in the same, for there's so much changes that have happened in our society. I take one example, for example, Mannya-Maxeke was part of the very first meeting of the Industrial Commercial Workers Union. That was the ICU that was established by Kadali. And one of the deliberations that were kind of the foundational questions around the labor movement in South Africa was that of equal pay for equal work. And in as far as women advancing that cause, they have been able to push for that. I think my colleague there, Phoebe, has made mention of that. In as far as that struggle is concerned, but there's something that has happened even within that space that requires a new rethinking around women's political rights. For example, according to a study by the business school of the University of Stellenbosch that was published last year in 2022, that while South African women have been able to make advances in as far as the equal pay, equal work kind of policy, there has been a more nuanced methods of oppression in the taxation that, you know, single women get taxed the most. So that is yet another side of the struggle that requires women's attention. So for me, not coming directly to that question, it is to say that they would have had their own standards based on the issues that they were confronted with. And our generation, in our own time, we also face our own challenges. You know, when you see that trajectory of women's struggles from the time of Mannya-Maxeke and debates around equal pay and what has transpired in that space, women being able to achieve in that, Mannya-Maxeke would be clapping her hands, but at the same time worried that there has been signs of regression in as far as activism that begins to attend to unfair taxation that keeps, you know, young, single working women locked in poverty line, even though they would have been graded as having been paid above poverty salaries, but that gets then taken away from their purse through taxation.
Thank you so much to all my panelists. I'm going to open up the floor to just 2 questions because we've unfortunately run out of time. So I'm going to take 1, 2, since those were the first 2 questions, and the mic will be brought to you. Please also indicate which panelist you're asking your question to.
First of all, I'm not going to give names of who. Well, I'm Leslie Mkhosi, I'm an author as well, author of a couple of books, but that's not important. What is important is that I'm so sorry and I'm feeling sad that when I look at the crowd here, it doesn't take me to become a quantitative analyst or any statistical person to see that the ratio of men versus women here is saddening. That's the first glaring thing that I see. I wish there could have been many, but at the same time, I'm also happy that we are in control. There are women who are here. And I'm very grateful for that, respect and love. However, there are certain things that in these opportunities we should use to be able to be realistic, to engage with reality and be honest with ourselves. The first one is, and that's a question I wanted to ask earlier on in the first panel, is that, and I write about this in my book, that there's a contrast between the generation of gender activists actually today and that of Brigalia Bam, Charlotte Maxeke. We must admit that that paradigm is gone. And what I'm trying to say is that we need to regain that paradigm. And that paradigm, they've described it as who those people were and how selflessly they were. The gender activists of today is a pseudo, not all of them, but majority of them are pseudo gender activists. They think for themselves only, they don't think for society. Secondly, they ghetto themselves from us as men because I'm not here to support or to be in solidarity with you. I'm with you in your struggle. That's how I think we need to be thinking about these things. The third one is that we need to admit, and I mean, I think the things when I say that there's a contrast, the contrast is that Charlotte Maxeke, as described there, was selfless, thinking for the other, not thinking for himself. Thinking with the other and thinking for others and working for others. The ones of today, nada. They think of themselves, how much car can I get, how many resources can I get, etc., etc., etc. That generation is different. Let's confront it and let's begin to say to the current generation, rethink yourself, think properly. The third part of it is that we have to accept that this struggle, and I wrote it in my book and I was nearly killed by a couple of people for just saying that, is a struggle, is an episode with no end. It's a social struggle, an episode with no end that we must accept. It's an episode with no end. But what we should be doing and encouraging this generation is that don't hold the candle. Hold it. We must fight this struggle forever. It's not something that I can say like the Constitution. We wrote the Constitution, now we're in power, elections are coming, next elections, this thing is over. No. We must intensify it and make sure that there are activists and people who can actually, on the ground, and I mean not the pseudo gender activist, but the real activist, as Mamu Brigalia said, as that generation, that old paradigm. So we must return back from that old paradigm to the new. That old paradigm we must regain. So I'm done now. Thank you very much.
I just want to ask, did you have a specific question or just a comment? Can we please give to number 2? Were you number 2? Or I think she was at the back. It was the lady seated next to the gentleman that just asked. And then we'll bring back the mic to you to close off our Q&A session. The mic will come back to you.
Thank you so kindly, and all protocol observed. My question is based on what is it that we ought to take from the women before us as this generation to go forward, to make sure that we lose nothing from what they have taught us, what we read about them, and what we need to carry going forward. What is it, the main core, the main thing that we need to take with us as we move forward and not lose what the women before us had?
Who on the panel would like to answer that question?
Maybe just in one word, the values that they embodied. If we talk about this, the sense of the servant leadership principle, the servanthood values, because they were leaders, but they were servants of the people. And that is what we can learn. They faced different challenges, we have different challenges, but the way in which they dealt with their own challenges, we can learn and embody those values to deal with the challenges that we face today.
And can we please give the mic to her? And we'll be closing off the Q&A session after her question.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Nontlantla, and I am a poet and an activist. I'm 20 years old, and I just released my first book, and it's called The Rainbow Nation is Black. And thank you so much. I'm also a third-year medical student at WITS. And essentially, this session today has greatly inspired me and moved me as a female Black writer, and just considering how writing and how activism in women has been instrumental for change in South Africa. And just also reflecting on how our institutions, in terms of universities, continuously fail students, and how there's constant socioeconomic disparities and injustices in these spaces. And my question is, how, as a Black privileged Black woman, I would say, do I actually stand in this situation and be an instrument for change in these institutions? Because my book is all about reimagining the Rainbow Nation, the whole concept of bringing everyone together and recognizing that even in contemporary South Africa, there are still disparities that we, especially as young people who are privileged, need to help and bridge and address and bring justice for other students so that we have fairness in terms of opportunities and access to education. So my question essentially is, how do I do that? How do I be an instrument for this change, for this reimagining of the Rainbow Nation in these institutions, in the institution WITS? How do I do that? Because I really want to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's only appropriate that Shaira answers your question, given that she's a former Fees Must Fall activist, and it's only appropriate that she answers your question.
Well, thank you for sharing that, my sister. I think there's a deep sense of strength that comes from being vulnerable and expressing your aspirations, but also your discomforts with the positionality that you've put forward. I myself was in no situation of financial exclusion at WITS at the time of deciding that we needed to protest against the exclusion of students, against the commodified education system that we had been experiencing and we could witness was completely unjust and completely unfair, that being intelligent was not good enough if you were poor, and in most situations if you were black, given the demographic nature of class in our country. So from what I hear, you're asking questions, you're writing, you're engaging in the writing of poetry, which is essential to the healing of our souls, to the rage that we have to express in some form of what we feel. And there's a lot of rage when you look around at the disparity, the many forms of inequality that we witness on a daily basis. So on a day like this, International Women's Day, we come together and we have these discussions. But we think about these things all the time. I don't think any of us, if we look around and we really see what we're looking at, cannot actually be experiencing a deep discomfort, the kind that you've expressed at where we are, not just in South Africa, but the world over. But the most important thing is to listen to that intuition, the shivers that you feel. Listen to it, act on it. Don't become desensitized to your discomfort. And that feeling of always listening to your intuition and to your heart and keeping your heart's eye open to the disparities, that will keep you on that path to making a difference, to being in solidarity in all the ways that you have to be. Because I'm not at WITS anymore now. I was there 8 years ago, which is a long time ago. I turned 30 this year. But I remember when we were walking to that council meeting where the fee increment was going to be voted on, I threw up my morning's breakfast. It was a physical discomfort. It wasn't just intellectually, this doesn't make sense, and theorizing things. It was a physical discomfort. And that's what you need to hold on to all the time. It's never wrong. And if you think it may be wrong, that's where your community comes in. So you can't do it alone. Surround yourself with people who are like-minded. Read, write, rage against what you feel needs to be raged against every single time.
Thank you so much to my panelists, the contributors to this wonderful book compiled by the Institute. Thank you to the Gautrain Management Agency. Thank you to Exclusive Books for hosting us today. And thank you to the Institute for compiling this tool, which is going to help us in this mission to historicize women and tell the stories, tell our stories as Africans, and ensure that our stories are not told by anyone else. And thank you to you all for being here with us today. So in closing, I'm going to call up Ms. Ntosh Tlokwana, who is the head of operations at the Charlotte's Mannya-Maxeke Institute, to give us our vote of thanks. And after that, I'm going to ask that all our panelists join me up on stage, because Kimberly will be bringing a gift from the Institute to you up on stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zuleika. Evening, ladies and gentlemen, and our honorable guests, our contributors to this historical book. I would like to first say, I'm hoping that the entire team of the Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke Institute is close by, because out of a dream from a small office in North Riding, that was initiated by the family of Mom Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke 6 years ago. And now we have a group of young women and men who are part of the team, who've decided to take on the mandate of Umam Charlotte Maxeke's legacy, to bring it to life. We run programs that include the Youth Forum, which is about leadership and agriculture. We conduct the Bring Her Up Women of First Awards. We do the Bring Her Up entrepreneurship program, which Usimpiwe is in the room. She trains women in KZN and here in Gauteng to start their own businesses. And now we've partnered up with the Department of Small Business. And we have young people in high schools and primary schools in different parts of the country who've actually learned how to start their own vegetable gardens. How to grow the vegetables, harvest them, share the harvest with the school kitchen, and to be able to take food home. So we have been able to skill young people to be future leaders, to be the future Charlotte Mannya-Maxekes. And so we are incredibly proud today that here is yet another dream that from our small office of incredible young women, whom I'd like to please come and join me in front with the leadership of our chairperson, Utula Sizumakani. Come guys, I can't stand here alone. I'd like for all of you to see their faces. This was a project that all of us, Lebo, Simpiwe, Kim, Unungi, Nolwazi, Uzuleka, she's always at the office. She's one of our ambassadors and a very active member. So these are the young women who are carrying on and taking on the baton, you know, of the work that Umam Charlotte Maxeke did. And, you know, with the leadership that we have in our board that have entrusted us to actually ensure that we continue with the work. And I hope that with these incredible, incredible women that have decided to make time and join us today, that all of us will be inspired to go back to our communities and plow back in whatever little way that we can. You know, all the work that we do is really to spread the message of Umam Charlotte Maxeke to say, we can continue the work. You know, it is up to us to make our country the place that we want it to be. It truly is. And whoever it is that inspires you in the space and the corner that you are in, we can each make a difference. And so I would truly, really, really like to thank you, all the contributors in the book, even the ones that are not here with us tonight. We have 21 incredible women. And we would like to thank the Gautrain Management Agency for your trust in us and for partnering with us. We truly appreciate you, Dr. Barbara and your team, Butsepo and your team. Thank you so much, Taho, all the calls and the conversations. And we'd like to thank the team of Exclusive Books, credible team, and our live stream team, and everyone who's made it, you know, today a reality. The AME Church is our incredible forever partner. Thank you, Sis Resho, for always showing up for us. Thank you, Mambaleka. Thank you, Dr. Bam. Thank you, Shaira. Thank you, Sis Jane. Thank you, Dr. April. Thank you, Sis Phoebe. Everyone that's in the book is family to us, actually, because each of them have contributed to the work that we do. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your time. We thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That brings us to the closing and the unfortunate end of our night. And I'd like to remind you that the book is for sale. It's 337 Rand. Please do visit, is it at the back? Please do visit the back of the store and please kindly purchase the book because all of the proceeds raised from sales of the book will head to ensuring that the Institute can continue to carry out the wonderful programs they do to ensure that the work doesn't end here and to continue to do the work of Charlotte Maxeke. And please also do take this as a book signing. The contributors as well as the chairperson of the Institute are here to sign the copies of the book you'll purchase. Thank you very much.